She stood up for the wrong person, or so they thought. When Angela defends an elderly janitor from a ruthless executive, she never expects to uncover a secret that will shake the company to its core, threaten her career, and test the limits of love, power, and ambition. In a world where loyalty is a gamble, will she risk everything for what truly matters? Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and please like the video to show support. Now get comfortable and let the story unfold. Angela moved through the office hallways with purpose, her coffee in hand, her mind already on the long day ahead. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, the murmurs of employees filling the air with half-hearted conversations and the clatter of keyboards. It was just another morning in a job that didn't inspire her, but paid the bills. Routine, predictable. But that predictability shattered when a loud crash echoed from the break. Room heads turned as the sound of sloshing liquid followed. Angela turned the corner just in time to see a mop bucket overturned, soapy water spreading fast. In the middle of it all was Barbara, the elderly janitor, frozen in place, gripping her mop with both hands as if willing herself invisible, and, standing across from her with a sneer sharp enough to cut steel, was Bellevue. Unbelievable, he spat, shaking his head like he had just witnessed a crime against humanity. How hard is it to do your job properly? Barbara didn't say anything. She simply bent down, reaching for a rag, moving with the careful precision of someone who had learned that apologizing only invited more scorn. The moment stretched, unbearably long, the silence thick with judgment. Angela saw the way Barbara's fingers trembled, the way her breath hitched before steadying again. She had seen this scene play out before, an older worker, overlooked, underappreciated, being berated by someone who enjoyed their own power too much. Bellevue scoffed. "Do you realize how much time you've just wasted?" He gestured dramatically to the floor. "Now someone will have to walk through here and slip because you couldn't be bothered to pay attention. Who do you think is going to take responsibility for that?" Angela's grip tightened around her coffee cup. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She glanced at the other employees standing nearby, their expressions varying between awkward discomfort and quiet relief that they weren't the ones in trouble. No one spoke up. Angela did. "That's enough." The words weren't shouted, but they landed with force, snapping Bellevue's attention to her. His expression flickered with irritation, as if she were a gnat he had to swat away. "Excuse me?" Angela stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. "There's no need to humiliate her." Bellevue's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, how noble of you," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But this isn't your concern." Angela crossed her arms, refusing to look away. "It is when I have to stand here and listen to you talk to someone like they're beneath you." Barbara glanced up sharply, her eyes filled with something unreadable. Surprise, gratitude, fear. Bellevue let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "And what exactly do you think you're accomplishing? This isn't some grand act of heroism, Angela. This is real life. She made a mistake. Mistakes have consequences." Angela tilted her head, her voice calm but firm. "And what's the consequence for being a condescending jerk?" A few of the onlookers sucked in quiet breaths. Someone stifled a chuckle. Bellevue's jaw clenched. "You think this is funny?" he said, stepping closer, his presence meant to intimidate. Angela didn't flinch. "No, I think it's pathetic." The room tensed. Bellevue exhaled sharply through his nose. "Careful, Angela. You might think you're standing up for something noble, but you're only making things worse for yourself." Angela took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "And you might think being feared makes you powerful, but it just makes you small." A heavy silence fell between them. For a moment it was just the two of them locked in a battle of wills. Then slowly Bellevue's lips twisted into something resembling amusement. But it wasn't real. It was the smile of a man who had lost control of the conversation. He turned to Barbara. "Clean this up, quickly." Then he walked off without another word. The crowd dispersed, but the weight of the moment lingered. Angela knelt beside Barbara, helping her gather the soaked rags and mop up the mess. "You didn't have to do that," Barbara said quietly. Angela shrugged. "Yeah, I did." Barbara studied her for a long moment before nodding. Later that evening, when most of the office had emptied, Angela found herself in the break room again, staring out at the city lights. She heard footsteps behind her, soft and hesitant. Barbara. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice softer now, no longer carrying the careful neutrality it had before. "People don't usually do that. Not for me." Angela turned, leaning against the counter. "People should." Barbara gave a small chuckle. "Maybe, but that's not how it works." Angela hesitated before speaking. "Has it always been like this?" Barbara exhaled slowly, her gaze distant. "For some people, yeah. You learn to keep your head down, to survive." Angela frowned. "That's not right." Barbara smiled faintly. "No, but it's how things are." Angela shook her head. "Not if I can help it." Barbara studied her for a long moment before something in her softened. "You remind me of someone I used to know." Angela raised an eyebrow. "I hope that's a good thing." Barbara chuckled. "It is." The moment stretched, heavy with something unspoken. Then Barbara reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded photograph. She hesitated before handing it over. Angela unfolded it, eyes widening slightly. At the sight of a younger Barbara, dressed sharply, standing in front of a building with a nameplate that looked oddly familiar. "Dumont Enterprises?" Angela murmured. Barbara nodded slowly. "I used to work here, a long time ago before things changed." Angela's heart pounded. There was something about the way Barbara said it, something heavy in her tone. "What happened?" Barbara gave her a small, knowing smile. "That's a story for another time." Angela looked at the photograph again, a strange feeling settling in her chest. There was more to Barbara than she had realized, and for the first time Angela wondered if she had just stepped into something bigger than she could have ever expected. Angela sat at her desk, staring blankly at the monitor. The numbers on the screen blurred together, meaningless, drowned out by the weight of everything that had happened that morning. She had known standing up to Bellevue would have consequences, but she hadn't expected the unease that followed. The office wasn't the same. People whispered, exchanged glances, avoided looking at her for too long as if she had become something dangerous, someone they didn't want to be associated with. An email notification broke through her thoughts. Subject: Meeting Request. HR. Angela exhaled through her nose, rolling her shoulders back. So it had begun. The walk to HR felt longer than usual. When she entered the office, the sterile atmosphere did little to put her at ease. A woman in a perfectly pressed suit sat behind the desk, her expression unreadable, the corporate version of pleasant neutrality. "Angela, please have a seat," she said smoothly, folding her hands together. Angela sat, crossing her arms. "I assume this is about this morning?" The woman offered a tight smile. "It's about maintaining professionalism in the workplace." Angela let out a quiet laugh. "Right, professionalism. So I understand that tensions arise," the woman continued as if she hadn't heard. "But it's important to handle conflicts appropriately. Public confrontations are never productive." Angela tilted her head. "Is that what we're calling what Bellevue did a conflict?" A pause, a flicker of hesitation in the woman's gaze. "We're simply ensuring that everyone in the company is aligned with our values." Angela raised an eyebrow. "And those values include letting higher-ups humiliate employees?" The woman's smile didn't falter, but it became emptier. "Angela, I'll be direct with you. You're a talented employee, and we don't want this incident to affect your future here. But pushing against management isn't in your best interest." Angela exhaled, tapping her fingers against her knee. She could play it safe. Nod along. Apologize. But then she thought of Barbara, of the quiet way she had started cleaning up that spill, like she had already accepted how the world worked. Angela met the woman's gaze. "I appreciate the concern," she said, voice even. "But if my future here depends on staying silent when someone is being mistreated, then maybe I'm in the wrong place." For the first time, the woman's expression cracked, just slightly. A flicker of something Angela couldn't quite place. Then, with a sigh, she leaned back in her chair. "I hoped you wouldn't say that," she admitted. Angela frowned. "Why?" The woman hesitated. Then, in a quieter voice, she said, "Because you remind me of me." A long time ago. Angela blinked. That wasn't what she expected. The woman continued, softer now. When I first started in corporate, I thought I could change things. I spoke up, I fought, and it didn't take long for me to realize that this world isn't built for that kind of idealism. Angela's stomach tightened. So what, you just gave up? The woman shook her head. I adapted, and I learned to pick my battles. She studied Angela carefully. You have a choice to make. Do you want to keep fighting? Or do you want to make sure you're still standing when the dust settles? Angela didn't answer. She wasn't sure she had one. After leaving HR, she found herself wandering down the hallway, lost in thought. That conversation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. She nearly walked past Barbara without noticing. You okay? Barbara asked, her voice quiet but steady. Angela hesitated, then shrugged. That depends. Have you ever been told you remind someone of a younger version of themselves? Barbara smirked. Once or twice. Angela leaned against the wall. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Barbara's smile faded slightly. Depends on how their story ends. Angela looked at her, a question forming, but before she could ask, Bellevue appeared down the hallway, walking with his usual air of self-importance. Angela, he greeted, his voice too smooth, too controlled. Barbara tensed beside her. Angela forced herself to remain calm. Bellevue. He clasped his hands behind his back, studying her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. So I hear HR had a little chat with you. Angela didn't take the bait. They did. Bellevue smiled, slow and deliberate. I assume they reminded you of how things work around here. Angela crossed her arms. They reminded me that some people think power means never being questioned. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened. And what do you think? Angela held his gaze. I think you should watch where you stand. When people get too comfortable at the top, they forget that the ground beneath them isn't as solid as they think. Bellevue's expression flickered, just briefly, with something unreadable. Then, with a chuckle, he shook his head. Careful, Angela. You might think you're the hero in this story, but this isn't a fairy tale. No one's coming to rescue you. Angela smirked. Who says I need rescuing? Bellevue studied her for another second, then walked away. Barbara exhaled next to her. That was a choice. Angela shrugged. It was the only choice. Barbara gave her a long look before shaking her head with a small smile. You really are something else. Angela glanced at her. Is that a compliment? Barbara chuckled. I haven't decided yet. That night, Angela stayed late at the office, staring at the city lights outside the window. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something, a moment that would define everything going forward. Then a quiet voice behind her. You're not alone in this, you know. Angela turned. Barbara stood in the doorway. I've seen people come and go, Barbara said. People who thought they could change things, people who got crushed under the weight of it all. But I've never seen someone fight the way you do. Angela swallowed. And? Barbara smiled. And maybe it's time someone fought with you. Angela blinked. You mean? Barbara nodded. I'm not afraid of men like Bellevue. I just forgot what it felt like to believe in something. She held up a small folded paper. This is a list of every employee he's mistreated. People too scared to speak up. But together? Angela took the paper, staring at it. The weight of it settled in her hands, but instead of fear, she felt something else. Determination. She looked back at Barbara, her voice steady. Then let's make sure we don't fight alone. And just like that, the tides began to turn. Angela sat at her desk, staring at the dim glow of her computer screen, but her thoughts were miles away. The office hummed with activity, yet it felt strangely distant, like she was watching the world move without really being part of it. The conversation with HR, Bellevue's veiled threats, and Barbara's unexpected revelations had all settled in her mind like a storm waiting to break. She knew she had crossed a line, but what she didn't know was whether she had made things better or worse. A familiar voice broke through her thoughts. You look like you're about to set that computer on fire. Angela turned to see Barbara standing at the edge of her desk, holding a half-washed rag in her hand, her expression unreadable. Angela exhaled. I wouldn't rule it out, Barbara. smirked, glancing at the pile of unfinished reports on Angela's desk. Let me guess. HR told you to behave, Bellevue gave you the "you'll regret this" speech, and now you're wondering if you're the fool in this story. Angela leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Not wondering, pretty sure I am. Barbara chuckled softly, but there was something in her eyes, something knowing. You think standing up for what's right makes you a fool? Angela hesitated. I think it makes me a target. Barbara studied her for a moment, then slowly sat down in the chair beside her. You ever hear the story about the woman who tried to change the world? Angela raised an eyebrow. Is this going to be one of those stories where she ends up jobless and bitter? Barbara smiled faintly. Almost, but not quite. Angela turned slightly, listening. Barbara leaned forward, resting her arms on the desk. Once upon a time, there was a woman who thought fairness mattered, who believed that if she worked hard, treated people right, and spoke up when things were wrong, she could make a difference. And for a while she did. Angela's breath slowed. She knew this wasn't just a story, Barbara continued, but the people in power didn't like that. They didn't like being questioned, so they made sure she knew her place, took things from her little by little, opportunities, security, until one day she wasn't in the office anymore, she was cleaning it. Angela felt something heavy settle in her chest. You. Barbara nodded, a slow, measured movement. Me. Angela's fingers curled into a fist. That's not fair. Barbara let out a quiet laugh. Fair? No. But that's life, sweetheart. Angela frowned. And you just accepted it? Barbara's eyes darkened slightly. I survived it. Angela exhaled sharply, shaking her head. I don't want to just survive it. Barbara watched her carefully. Then you better be ready for the fight that comes with that. Angela looked at her, at the weight of years in Barbara's expression, at the quiet strength she carried. And in that moment, she made a decision. I am. Barbara nodded once, as if she had been waiting for that answer. But the day wasn't done throwing surprises at her. Just as Angela returned her attention to her screen, a presence loomed nearby. She turned and froze. Tom Dumont, the CEO. Angela straightened instinctively. Tom wasn't the kind of leader who made casual appearances. His presence alone sent ripples through the office, making employees sit up a little straighter, type a little faster. He glanced between her and Barbara before speaking. Angela, a word. Barbara gave Angela a look before standing, slipping away silently. Angela followed Tom through the office, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on her back. He led her into his office, closing the door behind them. The room was quiet, expensive, the kind of place where decisions were made that changed people's lives. Tom leaned against his desk, arms crossed. I've been hearing things. Angela kept her posture even. I imagine you have. A flicker of amusement crossed his face before it was gone. You challenged Bellevue. Angela didn't blink. I did. Tom studied her for a moment. Most people don't. Angela tilted her head. Maybe that's the problem. Tom's expression shifted slightly, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. I don't like workplace politics, but I do like knowing when my employees have backbone. Angela frowned. So what is this, a test? Tom smirked. No, but I'm wondering if you know what you've started. Angela folded her arms. If standing up for people is starting something, then I guess I do. Tom nodded slowly. Then, after a beat, said, Bellevue's been here a long time, long enough that people have let things slide, but that doesn't mean I have to. Angela blinked, caught off guard. I'm saying that maybe it's time to start listening to the right people. Angela studied him carefully. And you think I'm one of them? Tom's lips twitched. I think you might be. A silence stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, Tom's expression softened. You remind me of someone. Angela's heart skipped. Let me guess. Someone who tried to change the world? Tom let out a quiet laugh. Something like that. Angela hesitated. Who? Tom glanced away, a brief flicker of something vulnerable in his gaze. My mother. Angela stilled. Something clicked into place. Barbara. The realization settled over her like a slow-burning revelation. She exhaled. "You don't talk to her." Tom's jaw tightened. "Not in a long time." Angela thought of Barbara, of the quiet pain she carried, of the weight in her voice when she talked about lost battles. Angela looked at Tom. "You should." Tom studied her carefully. "You think that would fix things?" Angela smiled faintly. "I think some things are worth fixing." A long pause. Then, slowly, Tom nodded. A few days later, Angela watched as Tom approached Barbara in the hallway. She saw the hesitation in his step, the way Barbara's eyes widened slightly in recognition, and then, for the first time in years, they spoke. Angela didn't need to hear the words. She could see everything in the way Barbara's shoulders relaxed, in the way Tom's posture softened, a redemption arc, a reconciliation, a grand gesture that proved love, whether in family, in friendship, or in doing the right thing, always found a way. Angela sat at her desk, trying to focus, but her mind was tangled in the events of the past few days. She had spoken up. She had stood her ground. And now, the office felt like a battlefield where everyone waited to see who would be left standing. The tension wasn't just in the whispers that followed her, or the sidelong glances from her co-workers. It was in the way Bellevue had doubled down. He wasn't the type to accept a challenge without striking back. She saw it in the way meetings she was supposed to attend were suddenly rescheduled without her, in the emails that mysteriously failed to reach her inbox. The passive-aggressive silencing tactics were in full force. He wanted to make her regret defying him. And if she had been alone in this, maybe she would have, but she wasn't. Barbara had changed. Not overnight, not in an obvious way, but in the quiet resolve she now carried. She didn't shrink into the background anymore. She made eye contact when she walked past Bellevue, didn't lower her gaze like she had before. Angela saw the small changes and knew that no matter what happened next, something had shifted. What she didn't expect was the message from Tom Dumont. "Meet me in my office." Angela's heart pounded as she walked through the halls. The CEO didn't summon people for casual chats, especially not junior employees who had just made enemies with one of his longest-serving executives. When she entered, Tom stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, hands in his pockets, looking out. Over the city, he didn't turn right away. "Angela," he said, finally glancing at her, "close the door." She did. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Tom spoke again. "You're making a lot of noise." Angela didn't flinch. "I wasn't aware speaking up was considered noise." Tom let out a quiet chuckle. "It is when it threatens the wrong people." He turned fully to face her, arms crossed. "You're not like most employees." Angela raised an eyebrow. "Because I don't tolerate workplace bullying?" "Because you don't back down," Tom corrected. "Most people in your position would have apologized by now, would have tried to smooth things over with Bellevue." Angela folded her arms. "Maybe that's the problem. Too many people let him get away with this for too long." Tom studied her for a long moment. "You really don't scare easily, do you?" Angela met his gaze evenly. "Not when I know I'm right." A slow smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You remind me of my mother." Angela's breath caught. "Barbara." Tom's expression shifted, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "She told you?" Angela hesitated. "Not directly, but I put the pieces together." Tom exhaled, turning back toward the window. "We haven't spoken in years. I thought she was better off without me." Angela frowned. "Why would you think that?" Tom didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was quieter. "Because I chose this." He gestured to the office around him, the corporate world, the power plays, the very things she fought against. "I built something different, something successful, but I lost her in the process." Angela softened slightly. "You don't have to keep losing her." Tom let out a slow breath. "Easier said than done." Angela stepped forward. "You're the CEO, Tom. You make impossible decisions every day. But the easiest one you'll ever make is choosing to fix something that's still fixable." Tom glanced at her, something shifting in his gaze. Then slowly he nodded. A knock on the door interrupted the moment. Bellevue stepped in without waiting for permission. his eyes flicking between Angela and Tom. "Am I interrupting something?" Angela tensed. Tom turned, his expression unreadable. "Actually, Bellevue, I was just about to call you in." Bellevue raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. "Good, because there's something we need to discuss. This situation with Angela. It's causing unnecessary distractions." Angela clenched her jaw. Tom sat on the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. "Unnecessary distractions." Bellevue nodded. "Yes, we have a culture here, Tom, a structure. And when people overstep, when they challenge leadership..." His gaze flicked to Angela. "It sets the wrong precedent." Angela braced herself, but Tom spoke before she could. "I agree," Tom said smoothly. Bellevue smirked, but it was short-lived. "Which is why it's time to change the precedent," Tom finished. Bellevue's smirk faded. "Excuse me?" Tom stood, his presence suddenly heavier, commanding the space effortlessly. "You're right, Bellevue. We have a culture, and for too long it's been one that protects the wrong people. That ends today." Bellevue's jaw tightened. "You can't be serious," Tom smiled faintly. "Oh, but I am." He turned to Angela. "Starting today, Angela will be leading a new initiative, Employee Advocacy and Ethics, a direct line for employees to report mistreatment. No more fear, no more silence." Angela's breath caught. "Wait, what?" Bellevue's face darkened. "Tom, this is ridiculous. You're going to let a junior employee dictate policy." Tom's gaze didn't waver. "I'm going to let the right people fix what's broken," Bellevue scoffed, but he wasn't in control anymore. He knew it. He turned to Angela, his voice lowering. "You think you've won something here?" Angela met his gaze without blinking. "I think I did the right thing." Bellevue exhaled sharply, then turned on his heel and stormed out. Silence filled the office. Angela turned to Tom. "Did you just promote me?" Tom smirked. "I did." Angela blinked. "I was expecting to get fired." Tom chuckled. "You'll have to settle for changing the company instead." Angela exhaled, still processing. Then, after a beat, she grinned. "This is going to piss a lot of people off." Tom nodded. "Absolutely." Angela laughed. Later that evening, Angela found Barbara in the break room, stirring a cup of tea. She slid into the seat across from her. Barbara raised an eyebrow. "You look smug," Angela smirked. Tom just put Bellevue in his place. Barbara's expression flickered with something unreadable. "Did he?" Angela leaned forward. "And he told me about you. About how he thought he lost you because of his choices." Barbara's lips pressed together. Angela's voice softened. "He wants to fix it." Barbara looked down at her tea. Then, after a moment, she sighed. "Took him long enough." Angela grinned. "You should give him a hard time about it." Barbara chuckled. "Oh, don't worry. I plan to." The grand gesture came later that night, when Tom walked into the break room and stopped in front of Barbara. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, Tom said, "I should have come back sooner." Barbara studied him, then nodded. "Yes, you should have." A beat passed. Then she pulled out a chair. Tom sat. Angela watched from the doorway, smiling to herself. Love, in all its forms, had found a way. Angela walked through the halls of Dumont Enterprises, feeling the weight of the past few days settle into her bones. Everything had shifted. Bellevue had lost his grip. Tom had taken a stand, and Barbara had finally spoken to her son. The ripples of those choices were still spreading, changing the company in ways that no one had expected. But change, Angela had learned, didn't come without resistance. She could feel it in the way some employees watched her now, with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. She had stepped into something bigger than herself, and not everyone was sure how to handle it. Some whispered that she had gotten lucky, that Tom Dumont had only protected her because of Barbara. Others thought she was reckless, playing with fire in a world that didn't tolerate idealists. Angela didn't care. She had made her choice. The sound of a throat clearing snapped her from her thoughts. She turned to see Tom leaning against the doorway of her office, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. "You look deep in thought," he said. Angela raised an eyebrow. That's what happens when you're suddenly in charge of a department that didn't exist a week ago. Tom chuckled. You'll manage. Angela rolled her eyes. That's easy for you to say. You run an entire corporation, he shrugged. Technically, you're helping me do that now. Angela narrowed her eyes. Is that your way of saying I should be thanking you? Tom smirked. I was going to say we make a good team, but if you want to thank me... Angela let out a dry laugh. You really enjoy pushing my buttons, don't you? Tom leaned in slightly, voice lowering just enough to send a small shiver down her spine. Maybe. Angela straightened, trying to ignore the way her pulse sped. Up, she wasn't blind. She had noticed the way Tom looked at her, the way their conversations had shifted from professional to something else entirely. It wasn't just tension. It was something unspoken, something neither of them had addressed outright. She wasn't sure she was ready to. Tom must have sensed it, because he stepped back, the teasing edge to his voice returning. I came to see if you were still standing after your first official day as the head of employee advocacy. Angela sighed. Barely, he grinned. That's a good sign. She gave him a pointed look. For who? Tom laughed but didn't answer. Instead, he studied her for a moment, his expression softening. You're really doing this, huh? Angela exhaled. Yeah, I guess I am. Tom nodded slowly, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. Good. A silence stretched between them, charged but uncertain. Then, just as quickly, Tom straightened. Well, I should let you get back to work before you accuse me of distracting you, Angela smirked. You assume I don't already think that? Tom chuckled. Fair point. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Angela staring after him, her thoughts more tangled than ever. The next day, things escalated. Bellevue wasn't gone, not yet. And he wasn't going down quietly. Angela had barely stepped into the office when she heard the raised voices. Employees whispered in the hallway as Bellevue stood in Tom's office, his voice carrying through the partially open door. This is ridiculous, Tom, Bellevue snapped. You're really going to throw away years of loyalty over this? Tom's voice was calm, steady. Loyalty isn't the issue here, Bellevue scoffed. No. Then what is? Angela inched closer, not caring if she was eavesdropping. Tom's voice was quieter now, but firm. Leadership. Silence. Then Bellevue laughed, but there was no humor in it. Leadership? You think I haven't led this company? You led with fear, Tom said. That's not the same thing. Bellevue exhaled sharply. You're making a mistake. Tom didn't waver. No, I'm fixing one. A long pause, then the sound of footsteps. Bellevue stormed out of the office, eyes dark and furious, pausing just long enough to glare at Angela before walking away. She watched him go, exhaling slowly before stepping into Tom's office. Well, she said, crossing her arms, that was fun. Tom let out a breath, rubbing the back of his neck. It was overdue. Angela studied him. Are you sure about this? Tom met her gaze. I've never been more sure of anything. Angela wasn't sure if he was just talking about Bellevue. That evening, she found Barbara in the break room, staring at her tea as if deep in thought. Angela slid into the seat across from her. Long day? Barbara gave a tired chuckle. Something like that. Angela hesitated, then said, Tom fired Bellevue. Barbara's lips pressed together, but there was something almost like relief in her eyes. Good. Angela smirked. You're not even going to pretend to feel bad. Barbara raised an eyebrow. Should I? Angela laughed. Fair enough. Barbara studied her for a moment before speaking again. And you? How are you holding up? Angela sighed. I don't know. Everything's changing so fast. Barbara nodded. Change is hard, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Angela exhaled. Yeah, I know. Barbara's gaze softened. And Tom? Angela hesitated. What about him? Barbara smirked knowingly. Angela groaned. Oh my God, not you too. Barbara chuckled. I've been around long enough to recognize when something's there. Angela shook her head, flustered. He's my boss. Barbara shrugged. And? Angela stared at her. And that's a terrible idea. Barbara leaned back, amusement dancing in her eyes. So is pretending you don't feel anything. Angela opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Barbara grinned. That's what I thought, Angela groaned. I hate you, Barbara laughed. No, you don't, Angela sighed, rubbing her temples. I don't know what to do. Barbara's expression softened. You already know. You're just scared. Angela swallowed. What if it ruins everything? Barbara smiled. What if it doesn't? That night, Angela found herself standing outside Tom's office, heart pounding. She hesitated for a second, then knocked. Tom looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. Angela? She stepped inside, inhaling deeply. I need to say something. Tom set down his pen, watching her carefully. Go on, Angela exhaled. I keep telling myself that I should ignore this, that it's complicated, that it's messy, that it could backfire. She met his gaze. But I don't want to run from it. Tom's expression shifted, something warm and undeniable in his eyes. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Angela let out a nervous laugh. That depends. What do you think I'm saying? Tom stood, stepping closer. That you're ready to stop pretending this isn't real. Angela swallowed hard. Yeah. Tom's gaze softened. Good. Then, before she could overthink it, he leaned in and kissed her. And just like that, everything else faded. Love, after all, always found a way. Angela hadn't stopped thinking about the kiss. It had been reckless, impulsive, and completely unlike her, and yet she couldn't bring herself to regret it. If anything, it had solidified something she had been denying for too long. Whatever was happening between her and Tom Dumont wasn't just a passing attraction. It was real, and it was dangerous. The next morning, she walked into the office feeling like every set of eyes was on her. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was the new dynamic she had created between herself and the CEO of the company. Either way, she couldn't shake the feeling that the air had changed. Tom had played it cool, of course. He had strolled into the office as if nothing had happened, making his usual rounds, shaking hands, pretending like his world hadn't just shifted overnight. And maybe for him, it hadn't. Maybe he could compartmentalize. Maybe he had kissed her and then simply moved on, while she was left dissecting every second of it. Barbara, on the other hand, noticed immediately. You look like someone who made a mistake, she remarked, as Angela sat down at her desk. Angela shot her a look. Good morning to you too, Barbara smirked, leaning on her mop handle. Am I wrong? Angela hesitated, then sighed. It's complicated, Barbara chuckled. Love always is. Angela stiffened. Who said anything about love? Barbara raised an eyebrow. No one, but you just did. Angela groaned, burying her face in her hands. I walked right into that one, didn't I? Barbara grinned. Yep. Before Angela could argue further, her phone buzzed. Meeting in my office. Now, Angela swallowed. She didn't need to see the name to know who it was from. Tom's office was as intimidating as ever. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a sleek, modern desk, the kind of place that made people nervous. Angela refused to let herself be one of them. Tom stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the city. He turned when she entered, and for a second there was something in his expression, something softer than usual. You're avoiding me, he said, skipping the pleasantries. Angela crossed her arms. I've been working. Tom tilted his head. That's not what I asked. Angela exhaled, trying to find the right words. Tom, that kiss, he stepped closer, was real. Her breath hitched. I know. Tom studied her, his gaze steady. Then what's the problem? Angela let out a nervous laugh. You mean besides the fact that you're my boss, the entire company is watching us, and I could lose everything if this goes wrong? Tom smiled faintly. You forgot one thing, Angela frowned. What? Tom's voice softened. You could win everything if it goes right. She swallowed, trying to ignore the way her heart pounded. That's a big if. Tom stepped even closer, closing the distance between them. So take the risk. Angela hesitated. I don't know how. Tom smirked. Lucky for you, I do. And just like that, she was kissing him again. The tension between them reached a boiling point over the next few days. Their stolen glances in meetings, the way his fingers brushed against hers when handing her reports, the late-night conversations that lingered just a little too long. But not everyone was happy about it. Rumors spread fast in the office. Some whispered that Angela was getting special treatment, that her sudden promotion had nothing to do with her talent. Others speculated that Bellevue's downfall had been orchestrated for her benefit. Angela tried to ignore it, but it gnawed at her. She'd worked too hard to let people reduce her to a scandal. The breaking point came when she overheard two employees near the break room. "She's just another one of those women who gets ahead the easy way," one of them muttered. Angela's blood ran cold. She had expected pushback, but hearing it out loud was different. It stung in a way she hadn't anticipated. That night she confronted Tom. "This isn't going to work," she said as soon as she stepped into his office. Tom looked up from his desk, eyebrows furrowed. "What?" Angela folded her arms. "People think I'm only here because of you, that I don't deserve this job." Tom sighed, rubbing his temples. "Angela?" "No, Tom," she cut in. "I need to know that I earned this, that I'm not just another office rumor." Tom leaned forward. "You think I would put you in this position if I didn't believe in you?" Angela swallowed hard. "Belief isn't enough. I need to prove it." Tom's gaze darkened. "To who?" Angela hesitated. "To myself," Tom exhaled, nodding slowly. "I get it." Angela took a deep breath. "I need space." Tom's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "If that's what you need." And just like that, they were back to square one. The next few weeks were brutal. Angela buried herself in work, refusing to let herself be defined by anything other than her results. She built out the employee advocacy department, creating real change within the company. And for the first time, people stopped seeing her as Tom Dumont's interest and started seeing her as a force of her own. But something was missing. No matter how many wins she had, no matter how much progress she made, there was a hollow space in her chest that wouldn't go away. And then, on a Friday evening, as she was leaving the office, she saw something she hadn't expected. Tom, standing in the middle of the lobby holding a microphone. Angela blinked. "What are you doing?" Tom smirked, proving a point. And then, with the entire office watching, he spoke. "For weeks, I've been pretending like I'm okay with the way things are, but I'm not." His gaze locked onto Angela's. "I'm in love with you." Angela's breath caught. Tom continued. "And I don't care what anyone says. I don't care about the rumors or the whispers. What I care about is you. And I'm not going to let fear decide this for us." Silence. Then someone clapped, then another. And before Angela could fully process what was happening, the entire office erupted in applause. Tom smirked. "So what do you say, Angela? Want to take the risk?" Angela let out a breathless laugh. "You're insane," Tom grinned. "Only for you." And with that, she walked toward him, ignoring the crowd, ignoring everything except the way her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. She grabbed the microphone from his hand. "Fine," she said, voice steady. "But if this ruins my career, I'm blaming you." Tom laughed. "Deal." And then, in front of the entire company, she kissed him, because love in the end was always worth the risk. Angela had always believed that office politics were a game she could choose not to play. But ever since Tom's public declaration, she had learned otherwise. The walls of Dumont Enterprises had eyes, and whispers followed her wherever she went. Some people admired her for standing her ground. Others resented her, convinced she had climbed too fast, that her success wasn't earned. It was a careful balance of knowing when to ignore the noise and when to fight back. She had chosen to fight. Still, the strain was getting to her. The whispers had turned into reports, questions about whether she and Tom could work together without a bias. Even though she had built employee advocacy from the ground up, there were doubts. The final straw came when a formal complaint landed on her desk. Anonymous, of course. An employee should not have this much influence over the CEO. "It's inappropriate. It creates an unfair work environment." Angela stared at the words, bile rising in her throat. She knew this would happen. She had prepared for it. And yet, it still felt like a punch to the gut. That night, Tom showed up at her apartment unannounced. "You're mad," he said the moment she opened the door. Angela crossed her arms. "Not mad, just..." She let out a breath. Frustrated, Tom stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "With me." "With all of it," she admitted. "With how, no matter what I do, no matter how hard I work, people will still think, I only got here because of you." Tom's jaw tightened. "That's not true." Angela looked at him. "Doesn't matter if it's true. It matters that they believe it." Tom exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "So what do we do?" Angela hesitated. "I don't know yet." He studied her, then nodded. "Then we figure it out." The next morning, she walked into work with her head held high, but the weight of doubt pressed down on her. She knew Tom had her back, but that wasn't enough. She needed to prove once and for all that she wasn't just someone's girlfriend, she was someone who changed things. A meeting was scheduled that afternoon. With the board, a discussion about the future of employee advocacy. Angela had expected it to be routine, a chance to showcase the department's progress. But as soon as she walked in, she knew something was off. The air was charged. The board members avoided her eyes. And then one of them spoke. "There's been some concern about favoritism." Angela didn't blink. "Favoritism?" A man in a tailored suit cleared his throat. "Given your relationship with Tom, some feel that your position compromises the integrity of leadership." Angela's stomach dropped, but she didn't let it show. "I built this department before there was any relationship to speak of." "Perception matters," another board member said smoothly. Angela glanced at Tom, who sat at the head of the table. His face was unreadable, but she knew he was furious. She took a breath. "So what are you saying?" The man in the suit adjusted his tie. "We're saying it may be best if you step down." Silence. Angela's fingers curled into fists beneath the table. She knew this moment might come, but hearing it out loud was something else entirely. Tom spoke before she could. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Absolutely not." The board exchanged looks. Tom continued. "Angela has done more for this company in the last few months than some of you have in years. She's made real change, and if you think I'm going to let you push her out because you don't like seeing a woman in power, think again." The tension in the room thickened. Angela exhaled slowly. "Tom," he turned to her. She met his gaze. "I need to do this myself." He hesitated. Then reluctantly, he nodded. Angela turned back to the board. "You're right about one thing. Perception matters, but perception can be changed. And if you're worried that my position is compromising this company's integrity, then let's solve the problem, not by stepping down, but by proving, once and for all, that I deserve to be here." The man in the suit frowned. "And how do you propose we do that?" Angela met his gaze evenly. "An independent review. Bring in a third party. Let them audit employee advocacy, my work, my hiring decisions, everything. If I haven't earned this job, I'll step down myself." The board members exchanged glances. Finally, one of them nodded. "That seems reasonable." The meeting ended on a tense but final note. Angela had given them no choice but to agree. As the room emptied, Tom stayed behind. He didn't say anything for a moment, just watched her. Then he let out a slow breath. "You're impossible," he muttered. Angela smirked. "You like that about me?" Tom sighed, shaking his head, but there was a hint of a smile on his lips. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Angela stepped closer. "Because if I stayed without proving myself, I would have started doubting too." Tom studied her. Then, in a voice quieter than before, he said, "You know I would have fought for you." Angela's chest tightened. "I know," Tom exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I just..." He paused. "I hate that you have to prove anything." Angela reached for his hand. "I don't." She squeezed his fingers. "But I want to." Tom let out a breath, then pulled her into his arms, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The audit was intense. Every decision Angela had ever made placed under a microscope, but she didn't flinch, and in the end the results were clear. She had earned this. A week later, she walked into a full staff meeting where Tom stood at the front of the room. When he saw her, his eyes softened, but when he spoke, his voice was all authority. "I have an announcement," Tom said. "The independent review of employee advocacy has been completed, and it confirms what I already knew. Angela has not only met expectations but exceeded them." A murmur spread through the room. Some looked impressed, others looked guilty. Tom continued, "So let's put the rumors to rest. Angela is here because she deserves to be." Angela let out a slow breath. Tom turned to her. "And since I know you hate grand gestures, I have one more thing." Angela narrowed her eyes. "Tom," he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Angela frowned. "What is that?" Tom smirked. "Your promotion." Angela's heart skipped. "What?" Tom handed it to her. "Chief Ethics Officer. Full control over employee advocacy. No oversight, no interference, just you making this company better." Angela stared at him. "You're serious?" Tom grinned. "Very." Angela swallowed. "This is insane." Tom leaned in. "So is falling." "In love with you." Angela laughed, shaking her head. "You're impossible." Tom smirked. "You like that about me." Angela looked down at the paper, then back up at him, and then, with the whole office watching, she kissed him. Because love, real love, always won. Angela sat at her desk, staring at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office. The weight of the past few months settled over her, heavy but not crushing. She had fought for her place, and she had won. But victories came with consequences, and some battles left scars long after the war was over. She had kept her job, she had earned her title, and she had kept Tom. So why did it feel like something was slipping through her fingers? A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Tom stood there, looking like he had something on his mind. That was never a good sign. "Got a minute?" Angela gestured for him to come in, but she could already tell this wasn't a simple visit. There was tension in his posture, something guarded in his expression. He shut the door behind him, leaning against it. "HR wants another meeting." Angela's stomach twisted. "About us?" Tom nodded. She exhaled. "Let me guess. More concerns about professionalism?" Tom hesitated. "Not exactly." Angela frowned. "Then what?" Tom ran a hand through his hair. "They think it would be better if we didn't work together." The words hit like a punch. "Better for who?" Tom sighed. "Optics. The board is still uneasy. They think if one of us steps down, it'll settle everything." Angela clenched her jaw. "And by one of us, they mean me." Tom didn't deny it. She let out a hollow laugh. "Of course, because it's always the woman who has to prove she belongs." Tom stepped closer. "I told them no." Angela's chest tightened. "And what did they say?" Tom exhaled. "They're going to vote on it." Angela stared at him, the implications sinking in. "And if they decide I have to go?" Tom's jaw tightened. "Then I'll make sure they regret it." Angela shook her head. "Tom, no," he cut in. "I won't let them do this to you." Angela searched his face. "And what if you can't stop them?" His eyes darkened. "Then I'll leave." Angela's breath caught. "What?" Tom's voice was steady. "If they try to force you out, I walk. End of story." Angela stared at him, heart pounding. "You'd give up your company?" Tom held her gaze. "I'd give up anything for you." The room went silent. Angela swallowed hard, shaking her head. "That's insane," Tom smirked. "So is letting them think they can control us." Angela looked away, trying to gather her thoughts. There has to be another way. Tom stepped forward, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his gaze. "Then we find it. Together." Angela exhaled, leaning into his touch. "You really would leave, wouldn't you?" Tom's expression softened. Without hesitation. Something in her cracked. She had spent so long fighting alone, so long proving she didn't need saving. But this wasn't about being saved. This was about love. And love was a battle they could fight side by side. The board meeting was held in the largest conference room, a space designed to intimidate. Angela and Tom sat at the head of the table side by side, while the board members debated their future like it was a simple numbers game. "She's an asset to the company," one board member said. "She's also a liability," another countered. Tom's fingers curled into a fist on the table. "She's the reason this company still has a reputation worth protecting," a woman across the table sighed. "No one is questioning her talent, Tom, but perception matters." Angela finally spoke. "And what perception is that? That a woman can't hold power unless there's a man behind her?" Silence. Angela leaned forward. "I've worked for everything I have, and if you take this away from me, what message does that send to every other woman in this company?" More silence. Then the man in the suit, the same one who had doubted her before, cleared his throat. "We'll take a vote." Angela's heart pounded as hands rose around the table. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Angela stayed. As they left the meeting, Tom pulled her into a side hallway, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Told you we'd win." Angela smiled, letting herself believe it. That night, as they stood outside the office, Tom took her hands. "Come away with me." Angela blinked. "What?" Tom smirked. "No work, no drama, just us." Angela hesitated. "Where?" Tom grinned. "Does it matter?" Angela laughed. "You're serious?" "Deadly." She studied him, then exhaled. "Fine." Tom's grin widened. "Best decision you've ever made." Angela rolled her eyes. "Debatable." He kissed her, and for the first time in a long time she let herself just be happy. Because love, real love, always won. Angela had always believed that if she worked hard enough, fought long enough, and proved herself time and time again, she could control her own future. But standing in her office, staring at the resignation document in Tom's hands, she realized that control was just an illusion. She had won. The board had relented, her leadership was cemented, and she had earned every inch of power she held. But now Tom was stepping down, willingly walking away from the company he had built because of her, and she wasn't sure she could let him. She swallowed hard. "You're really doing this?" Tom nodded, his expression steady. "I've thought about it for a long time." Angela exhaled, pressing her fingers to her temples. "You love this company." Tom smiled faintly. "I love a challenge, and right now staying isn't the challenge, leaving is." Angela let out a short laugh, more disbelief than amusement. "You're just going to walk away?" Tom studied her for a moment before stepping closer. "I don't need to be here to prove I built something great. Dumont Enterprises will be fine without me, and under you it'll be better." Angela's chest tightened. "But you don't have to leave." Tom reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "You deserve to lead without anyone questioning if you got here because of me. No more rumors, no more board meetings where you have to defend yourself, no more fighting battles that shouldn't even exist." Angela searched his face, looking for hesitation, regret, something that would tell her he was second-guessing this decision. But all she saw was certainty. She hated it. She stepped back, shaking her head. "I didn't ask you to do this." "I know." "Then why?" Tom sighed. "Because I want to." Angela crossed her arms. "You're lying." Tom let out a quiet chuckle. "You always know when I am." Angela clenched her jaw. "So tell me the truth." Tom hesitated, then exhaled. "Fine. The truth is, I hate that this company almost took you from me, that I almost lost you because of it, that every day we stay here, we have to justify our relationship to people who don't matter." Angela swallowed hard, looking away. Tom's voice softened. "I'm not leaving because I don't love this company. I'm leaving because I love you more." Her breath hitched. Tom ran a hand through his hair. "If I stay, you'll always have to fight to prove yourself, and I won't let that happen." Angela's voice was quieter now. "And what happens? If you leave and I realize I can't do this without you?" Tom smiled, stepping closer again. "Then you're not the woman I fell in love with." Angela let out a shaky breath. "You really believe I can do this?" Tom cupped her face gently. "I've never believed in anything more." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken fears. Angela looked down at the resignation letter still in his hands. It was real. If she let him file it, everything would change. She had fought so hard to prove that she wasn't just the CEO's girlfriend, that she wasn't just a woman lucky enough to be loved by a powerful man. She had built something of her own, but the thought of running this company without him, of looking over at his office and seeing it empty, sent a pang of something sharp through her chest, and then an idea formed, a wild, ridiculous, perfect idea. Angela took the resignation letter from his hands. Tom raised an eyebrow, waiting for her reaction. She didn't hesitate. She ripped it in half. Tom blinked. "Angela, no." She ripped it again, then once more, until the pieces fluttered to the floor between them. Tom exhaled sharply. "You really love making things difficult, don't you?" Angela smirked. "You wouldn't love me if I didn't." Tom tilted his head, amused. "So what's your plan?" Angela stepped forward, grabbing his tie and pulling him down to her level. "We run this company together." Tom stared at her. "Together?" Angela nodded. "Not as CEO and employee, as equals, as partners." Tom's lips parted slightly. "You think the board will agree to that?" Angela smirked. "They won't have a choice." Tom let out a low laugh. "And how exactly do you plan to pull that off?" Angela crossed her arms. "I've spent months proving that I'm capable of leading this company. You've spent years proving that you're willing to adapt to whatever challenge comes next. If we announce that we're restructuring the company to make leadership equal, the board won't be able to argue against it." Tom studied her. "And what if they try?" Angela's smile widened. "Then they'll have to find someone else to run this place because we're a package deal." Tom chuckled. "Now that's a power move." Angela raised an eyebrow. "You like it?" Tom grinned. "I love it." Angela leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "Then let's go make history." And they did. The next morning, Dumont Enterprises held a press conference. Employees, board members, and reporters filled the massive event space, waiting for an announcement they all assumed would be Tom's resignation. Tom stepped onto the stage first, standing tall, the perfect image of a CEO about to hand over his empire. Then Angela walked out beside him. Whispers filled the room. Camera flashes lit up the stage. Tom took the microphone. "There's been a lot of speculation about the future of this company, about leadership, and about the direction we're headed in." Angela stood beside him, chin lifted. Tom continued, "We've decided that Dumont Enterprises doesn't need a single leader." He turned to Angela. "It needs two." Gasps rippled through the audience. Angela took the microphone next. "Effective. Immediately, Tom and I will be co-leaders of Dumont Enterprises. We will run this company together, as equals. And if anyone has a problem with that, they're free to take their talents elsewhere." Silence, then applause. It started slow, hesitant, then grew into something undeniable. Employees clapped. Reporters scribbled frantically. Even some board members nodded in reluctant approval. Angela turned to Tom, heart pounding. "I think that went well," Tom smirked. "You think?" Angela rolled her eyes. "You're impossible." Tom pulled her in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And you love that about me." Angela laughed, letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they had finally won. And this time, they had done it together. At the heart of this story is a simple truth. Real success isn't just about power, titles, or proving yourself to others. It's about knowing your worth and standing by the people who believe in you. Angela and Tom's journey reminds us that love and ambition don't have to be at odds. True partnership is about lifting each other up, not competing for the top. No matter how hard the world tries to define you, remember, you have the power to write your own story. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us out, and let us know in the comments what you thought about this story. See you in the next one.